Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lamont, and welcome to NYO Canada Online Workshops. Our YouTube live chat is open, and we will be fielding questions throughout the workshop, so please feel free to post any comments, questions, as well as chat amongst each other. We will also be sticking around for an extended question period afterwards. Today, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Christie, a retired flautist from the OSM and mental performance coach on faculty at McGill University, as well as Lorna McGhee, principal flute of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra.
Thanks so much, Chris. And it's my great pleasure to be here with Carolyn. And the way we're going to conduct this, Carolyn is the expert, and I'm going to be interviewing her as we go along, and hope it will be helpful for you. I have a special t-shirt that I'm wearing today, my Musicians of Steel. That's our motto in Pittsburgh. Of course, it's a steel town. And I thought it was a perfect metaphor for today, because what we hope you'll get out of this class are some strategies and some resources to help you be strong and resilient, and to be able to sustain yourself and just be so indestructible as a performer. So these are skills that we can learn, and maybe just to start off before we jump into the questions is to give you a little bit of background. As Chris said, I'm principal flute in the Pittsburgh Symphony, and I just want to reassure all of you that nerves are nothing to be afraid of, and it's because you care. And so there's a way that we can welcome the nerves and work with them, and work with them in a constructive way. And just to reassure you that the professionals still get nervous. So we're all human, and we develop a toolbox of resources as to how to deal with nerves. And of course, nerves affect different people in different ways. For me, they've shown up in different scenarios. You know, for sometimes I get it in a kind of dissociative state, a little bit spacey. So I might find it hard to focus when I'm preparing for a particularly stressful concert or concerto or something like that. Something that's a big stimulus. I might get that kind of dissociative state of mind where instead of practicing well, I end up in a kind of daydreamy state, looking out the window for 20 minutes and realizing I haven't actually played anything for a while, or on stage or prior to the concert, just feeling like I need to drink a lot of coffee to get awake enough to play. So that's an unusual form of nerves. It's just one of the spectrum. You know, some people have the shakes, some people have very hot, sweaty palms, or the breathing becomes very, very shallow. Other ways it shows up for me is sometimes, like, physically I'll get a lot tighter. For example, I remember being in the finals of some big auditions, well, one in particular, where my jaw got so tight that none of my low notes came out. And that had never been a problem before in the practice room or indeed in other auditions. So that was a particularly big stimulus, that the final of that, it was for a big job. And anyway, it didn't go my way, but you learn from it. And these are the things that help you build your toolbox. So that is our hope for you today, is just to help you build your own toolbox. And so I just want to pass it back to Carolyn now.
And I know a lot of you at NYO from speaking there last year and a couple of years before. But for those of you who don't know me, I want to just tell you briefly what I'm doing now as a mental skills counselor or consultant, and why. And I was in the Montreal Symphony for 36 years, very stressful, 100 recordings, lots of tours. And I was fine for the first maybe 15 years of that time, but from my 50th to 20th year, and this speaks to how individual nerves are, I started to get very, very bad stage fright. And I started to play well enough not to get fired, but not well enough that I felt I was doing my best. So I made a conscious decision to try to figure out ways where I could play my best on stage. And as Lorna said, we had no help with this. We had no training. There were no resources. So I'm talking about 25 years ago now for me. Anyway, I figured out some techniques all on my own and employed them, and they worked for me. Now, about 10 years ago, my niece, Summer Christie, who is now a sports psychologist, she was training to be a mental performance skills counselor like I am now. It sounded very interesting to me. I had her come to McGill to speak to my flute players, and I just was gobsmacked because the skills she was teaching my flute players in a very organized manner were the skills that it took me 25 years to learn on my own. So I thought this was highly transferable to music performance, which it is. And I retired at the young age of 60, 6 years ago from the OSM. I went to the University of Ottawa and I got the same degree that my niece had at the time. So I'm now called an MPC, a mental performance coach, and I coach peak performance skills specific to musicians. So my goal with these talks and with my training now is to use my experience on the stage and my research from the University of Ottawa to help you learn what took me 25 years to learn myself. So that's why I'm doing this work. And I want to underline something that Lorna said earlier. This work is highly individual. So what works for one person or one speaker may not work for you. We have to find something that works for the individuals. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today will be like the talk yesterday, isolating and separating, acknowledging what we can control and what we cannot control. And I just want to start by saying that I firmly believe you need 4 things to be successful in a performance. The 2 things that you can control we'll be talking about today, and that is effective preparation and controlling your mindset. With practice, this can be controlled. The things we cannot control are talent. You all have talent or you wouldn't have been accepted to NYO, so you can check that one off. And the other thing is luck. Luck has everything, luck involves everything from being healthy the day of a performance or audition, to who's on the jury, to whether you're in a bad hall, to whether your instrument breaks. That's luck. These are things we cannot control. So, and I just wanted to make one comment that comes out of our talk yesterday when we were looking for hope in this situation. And I was delighted to see a comment online on Facebook today from one of my OSM colleagues who said that the OSM is going to start up again in June on stage in a limited format.
Oh, that's great.
I was so delighted to hear that. So I don't know exactly what the form is going to be, but they're going to be back on stage in some capacity. So we've got to just hold out, get through this thing in a healthy manner, and then we're back on track.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Now, Lorna, would you like to start with some questions?
Sure. I would love to do that. So basically, our discussion is going to be about a few main things: confidence, motivation, distraction, and self-presentation. So the first question is about confidence. And I just want to acknowledge that I have the live comment feed and I'm keeping an eye on it. And there's one question I think I might even ask right now, if you don't mind, Carolyn. And if you think you can answer it right now, what does it mean to play your best? Just so we can define that before we start. Thank you.
Very, very good question. To me, it means to play up to my potential. To play on stage the way I can play when I have no stress, which is in my practice room. That's what it means to me. Lorna, do you have a different take on this?
Yeah, I love your definition. And I also would add the caveat that your best is going to change from day to day. If you have given your best for that day, we have lives. There's some days you may not be feeling well. There may be days that you have a family crisis. Nevertheless, you give your best for that you can in that moment. And that's all you can ever do.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not anybody else's threshold. It's your own threshold, I would say.
Yes. And that's a great comment, Lorna. what we're going for in this work are what athletes call a personal best. We're going for the best we can do, not in comparison to other people, but our personal bests.
Great question. Okay, so I'll jump into the questions. The first one is about confidence and negative self-talk, which we all have, and how do we get a handle on this? So for example, when in our mind, the little critic, our inner critic is saying, I can't do this, I'm no good, and you go down this rabbit hole of self-deprecation.
Oh, yeah.
How would you advise somebody to deal with that?
I just see The Simpsons when this comes up with Homer's angel on one shoulder and devil on the other shoulder, if you're familiar with The Simpsons. We want to get that angel working for us because, as Lorna just said, even the pros, we can dig ourselves into holes with negative self-talk, and that means the inner dialogue, what you're thinking in your mind. So I want to speak about confidence first because the pillars of confidence will feed into our self-talk or inner dialogue management. So you've heard me speak about this before at MYO. There are three mainstays of confidence. And the number one is if you're about to do something that you've already done well. So if you're going to do an audition video for NYO next year, you know you've already done one well because you're in. If you're going to do a professional video for an audition, it might not be exactly the same as an NYO video, but you can borrow the confidence of having done something similar well. So that's number one in confidence building. Number two is positive feedback you've received from someone whose opinion you value. So if Lorna McGhee heard one of my recordings and said, what a beautiful sound, my goodness, would that be confidence building for me? If one of my girlfriends who's not a musician said the same thing, it would be very empowering for my heart, but not confidence building. So feedback from someone whose opinion you value can really bolster your confidence. So whose opinion you value, that's the important thing, because sometimes we're dealing with critics with whom we don't agree, frenemies, I use that word a lot, who maybe are trying to get under our skin. These are not comments that would necessarily bolster our confidence. So we have to be very clear to know if we value the opinion or not. And number three in confidence building for us is observation of somebody who's doing the thing you want to do and they're doing it really well. My example as a career second flute player would be like I always say, I played second to the gods of the flute. I mean, I really did, including my own teacher when I started. And if I was joining in a duo, I would listen to this incredibly beautiful sound and try to join the sound. I would also in the OSM, like a terrific string section, I would listen to the string section and think, I want to join that sound. I'm observing something incredible and I want to join it. Our percussion section, the timpanist, unbelievable. I would listen to the sound and try to join that sound. Very confidence building. So are any questions about this so far? I'm not reading all the...
Yes, well, we have one question from Diana D that maybe we can just wait till we've... Oh, well, there it is. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Diana, good question. And I'm glad you said that because what I'm talking about right now is off stage self-talk management. At the end of the seminar, if we have time, we can go into on stage. So thank you for posing the question. Now I'm going to get into how to manage this off-stage self-talk management using the confidence builders. So number one is to recognize when a negative thought is not helpful to your performance or whatever. Now this is off-stage. So if you have a negative thought that's like, oh, that was out of tune when I'm practicing, I better fix it. That is actually a helpful negative thought. What I'm thinking about are more the negative thoughts like, I'll never be good enough, I'm not as good as her, I'm not as good as him. Those thoughts are not helpful. So number one is recognize. Number 2, it's very helpful to establish some sort of a cue, we call it, a word or phrase to help to change that negative thought. So I think, stop it. That's my phrase. I think, oh, I'll never be as good as Lorna McGhee. Then I think, stop it. And then number 3 is reframe that negative sentence in an honest, positive way. So let's say I think, oh my gosh, I'm about to join playing a duet with Lorna McGhee. I'll never sound that beautiful. And this is before I play. It's not during performance. Number 2 is I think, just stop it, Carolyn. And number 3, I would think, I have my own sound. I've prepared well. I'm ready to go. So again, this is off stage. Any questions about this, Lorna? Anything you think I could explain better?
No, there's no more questions showing up in the live comments right now. No, I think you're explaining it really, really clearly. So it's kind of remembering, so the confidence builders, those 3 that we talked about, the memory of doing something well in the past, we can use that as a resource to draw on. And then the positive feedback from people we value, that also helps to block out that negative voice in our own head, because it's somebody we respect. And so that becomes a strong voice in our own head. And what was the last one?
The third one I found helpful. Like you can find helpful in a master class. You're listening to somebody else play the piece you're about to play and they're nailing it.
That's right.
Yeah, you have the choice to think, oh God, I'll never sound that good, or to think, stop it. I have my own voice. I prepared, here I go.
Yes, and to maybe take the also positively, from your mentors. So, for example, my teacher was William Bennett. I just love him. I just think he's one of the flute gods. But in particular, like learning from a mentor, when he performs, there's no hesitation. It's fearless. It's courageous and fearless. If he's going to go wrong, he will just go wrong. Damn it. It's just this wonderful generosity of spirit. So that's a role model for me. So yeah, that helps to have that framework in my own head. Yeah.
And live performance, this isn't backstage, but live performance is risk-taking, and that's what makes concerts so terrific. Mm-hmm. The risk-taking of just going for broke when you're on stage.
Carolyn, there's one question that's shown up in the comments here that I think is very helpful from Delia about how can we, well, I think you've answered the first part. How can we determine which negative thoughts are healthy and which aren't? Are they useful, or are they just sabotaging? So as you said, if you're listening and editing yourself like that was out of tune, that's useful because you can do something about it and you can take action. If it's just like, you idiot, why did you play that out of tune again? You're never going to get it in tune. That's really not useful. So we can determine the difference. And how can we best utilize these thoughts and not lose our edge and become too relaxed? The goal is not, you can't really be relaxed as a performer, but you can be skillful. Mm-hmm. So the goal, I would say the goal is not to be relaxed, is to be able to perform at your best. It may include being in a more relaxed state, but the goal is not relaxation. To my mind.
Yes. If we have time to do effective goal setting and practicing, we can definitely get into that. Performing to keep the edge without being too relaxed, for sure. Delia, your question is great. And to add to what Lorna said, for the first part, I think the question to ask yourself, and I quote my professor, Terry Ehrlich, is it helping you to think like that? If the answer is yes, that's productive. If the answer is no, that's when you use the self-talk. Now, I wanted to mention, when you get used to, you have to practice this self-talk management. It's not going to come under stress if you don't practice it. It's just like practicing a scale. And then start to anticipate situations in which you will need this. When do people get under your skin? When do situations get under your skin? Is it sitting in a masterclass waiting to play? Is it out? Is it in a big room warming up with everybody else for an audition? Anticipate and be ready. Okay. Okay. Now, another thing I might add to this is a little different than managing self-talk, but it's part of a pre-performance plan, is to develop a mantra, something you repeat to yourself, that you practice and practice and practice so it comes when the negative stuff gets in. I've got this. I've done the preparation. I'm a good flute player. I'm a good percussionist, whatever. Practicing a mantra can be extremely helpful as you enter a stressful situation.
Carolyn, can I just add two little things here? I don't want to stop your flow of things, but in the Don Green books, either Performance Success or Audition Success, he also says, have a sense of humor. Your inner critic is always going to be with you. And, he jokes about, imagine you have to, book a seat for your inner critic when you're on the way to fly to an audition. It's going to be there. So just having a lightness and a sense of humor about it is helpful too. And if I could offer an example, a real life example of, even at my advanced age, going down the rabbit hole of negative self-talk, that we had a concert with Emanuel Axe with the Pittsburgh Symphony, a little chamber concert, and I got to play some chamber music with him, which was a great honor and privilege. And in my preparation for that, it became more and more of a burden. And I felt like I'm not good enough to play with Emanuel Axe. It's never going to be good enough. And then I had to stop myself and say, Lorna, you can play these pieces. These are not beyond you. You can play them. You just offer the best that you can offer and just show up and enjoy this performance. It'll probably only be a once in a lifetime chance that you get to play chamber music with Emanuel Axe. And I did not want, my self-talk was in danger of eclipsing that joy of it. So just having the tools in your toolbox to be able to recognize, as Carolyn is saying, recognizing the negative talk that is not helpful, reframing it, and then you have a way to move forward.
And Lorna, that's a classic example of doing it using a positive, honest replacement sentence. It's a classic use of self-talk, although maybe you didn't know you were doing it then. Yes. I have to say, I can't resist this anecdote. It was my last tour in Europe with the OSM, and we were doing Mother Goose or something that's a little stressful, to say the least, for second flute. And I'm sitting there, and I look at, and there's Emanuel Axe and Anne-Sophie Mutter sitting right in front of my line of vision. I couldn't get them out of the line of vision because they were right on the left hand of the conductor. And at first, of course, I thought, oh, crap. And then I thought, they're not here to hear you. They're here to hear the music. And Marc-André Hamelin was the piano soloist. They were there to hear him. So before I started to play, I reframed my concern about how I was going to be judged by somebody else. Maybe we can get into this now, Lorna. Okay. And I reframed it in an honest and healthy way.
Right.
We wanted to talk a little bit at some point about how we are viewed by others, how much of our concern is how people are perceiving us. This is called self-presentation. Because we're in a field where we audition for everything, pretty much, that it's a concern. And it's not helpful to think about how others are going to perceive us, because we cannot control how others perceive us. What we can control, again, to recap, is our preparation and our mindset. So, Lorna, maybe we could go into healthy goal setting for during a performance.
Okay.
At this point.
Yeah.
A healthy goal for an audition, for example, is not to win the audition. You don't want to be thinking about that during the audition, because then you're not thinking about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. A more healthy example of a goal for while you're playing your audition would be to sing with your own voice, or play with character, or play with phrasing, or many bass players and keyboardist clients have said their goal for performing is to drive harmony. That would never be a goal for a flute player, because we don't do that, but it's unique to everybody. So a healthy goal for a performance is not to win something, because you cannot control the outcome. The time to think about winning is when you're planning your preparation and when you're practicing. When you confront what you have to do every single day to be at the level of expertise so that you can sing or drive the harmony or play with the character of every piece that you're doing. So there is a healthy time to think about what you have to do in order to win. Most of us do auditions to win them, but it's not when you're playing.
So with the two questions about motivation. So I'm, for example, something that I used to do when I was a student is I would sometimes bury my head in the sand and wait until fear was a motivator, and then you'd practice, in a kind of cramming, and so that's at least a kind of, it's not a very reliable way to practice, and it's a lot of stress on your body too, isn't it? So how would you encourage a student to find more healthy sources of motivation other than fear?
Well, I'm laughing because fear motivated me a good amount of the time too. I discussed motivation a little yesterday, so I'll go through it quickly today, and this will lead directly into how to effectively plan for a great performance. The top motivator is what we call intrinsic joy, which is when you just get pure pleasure out of doing the thing you're about to do. Many of us are not feeling this right now because many of us are not practicing. So we're going for that. Number two on the motivational scale is to value the task of learning what you have to learn. To value that you have to put a certain amount of time in the practice room, into concentrated practice in order to play the piece you're going to do and play it well. So this is valuing the task. It's very important. The third lower on the motivational scale are rewards, like to bribe yourself somehow. I'm going to practice for 10 minutes and then I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to practice for an hour on a piece I don't like and then I'm going to do something. So these are rewards. I'm sure many of you played your instruments or played piano or recorder young, and your teachers put those little gold stars or silver stars, or my favorites were always the little pictures of composers' heads. Maybe someone can tell me if those still exist or if this is like 1960 scholarship. But that was an example of my teacher trying to reward me, and I really wanted those stickers, which makes no sense. So I would practice in order to get the stickers. So she was getting me to the piano to practice when I didn't want to because I wanted that sticker at my lesson. And I want to add something to the motivational scale that I didn't speak about and should have yesterday. And that's the lowest thing. And that's amotivation, when you're not motivated at all. And many musicians are feeling that now. So we're trying to find ways to get started. I can't remember who it was yesterday. A student made a comment that was so apropos. The student said, it's so hard to just get in the room when you're not practicing. And I think that's a step into the room just by acknowledging that. It is hard to get into the room. We spoke yesterday a little bit about inspiration, and I'm pretty sure more speakers will go into this in more depth. What inspires you to practice when you don't feel like it? What inspired you to practice? Perhaps there's something on all auditions that recur. Like for flutes, it's usually an exposition of a Mozart concerto. And even if we love the piece, what inspires you to get back in the practice room and do something different with the piece when you played it so much? Lorna, I'm wondering if you would have any commentary on that. What would get you to practice something like a good piece, but you played, it's like being on tour and doing the same thing 30 times, which NYO has done many times.
Yeah.
What would inspire you to practice?
Okay.
Excuse me.
I have a lot of thoughts about all of these different types of motivation, but just to answer that question specifically, I think I always feel like in my practice, there's a certain amount that is just simply maintenance. Like you do your long notes for string players with their open strings. You practice your scales. There's just a certain amount of maintenance that you just have to accept and tolerate and understand that feeds into the larger picture and allows you to do what you want to do as a musician. If I don't do that, I have just way fewer possibilities than to bring something new. You need to be firing on all cylinders than to be able to bring something new to your Mozart. What?
Can I just jump in here, because you said something great. It's knowing that you have to do the maintenance in order to reach the ultimate goal. So this is terrific. And I'm wondering if this would help students get into the practice room. Just thinking about how you used to sound, how the orchestra will sound next year when MYO goes again. Think about the ultimate goal.
Oh, I love that.
And we discussed this earlier, Lorna, and yesterday as well. Don't start with practicing for 4 hours. Start with 5 minutes. Start with shorter clips than you're used to doing. That can be helpful to do those long tones, open string, get yourself going. 5 minutes.
So in terms of this COVID time right now, I feel very, very strongly in myself that it's a discipline. Like I am happy to get to the practice room right now, and the maintenance is just something that keeps me very steady. I find it quite comforting, and then I just know, okay, when we're up and running again, I'm going to be ready to go. I'm not going to have to climb a mountain to get my playing back up to where I want it. So I feel like it's my job right now as a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony to keep my level.
And that's the second motivator. That's task value in the job.
Right. And I don't want to let my colleagues down when we come back, and it's actually a beautiful, in some ways, it's a beautiful opportunity to have spacious around your practice. So I'm not having to learn next week's program. I can try and improve my sound, can I find more ease in controlling the dynamics, so that is the, I suppose that's the task value again, isn't it? I just find enjoyment even in just refining my skills, even though I'm not necessarily practicing pieces.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then oh, sorry, Carolyn, it's hard to.
You go ahead.
Okay, and then the intrinsic. I also find quite a lot of intrinsic joy right now. And what helps me in that respect is I have a whole book of Bach, and it's excerpts from the Well-Tempered Clavier or some of the violin partitas. That's something that brings me a lot of joy. It's not like practicing the Eber Flute Concerto or the Nielsen or excerpts. So if that's a resource for people, just to go back to pieces they really, really enjoy, then I think that could be a way in. And then in terms of bringing something new when you're listening to your playing your Mozart, for example, there's so many different ways you can access that. Can I find more ease physically in what I'm doing? That's a big one for me because I'm very influenced by Alexander technique. Can I interfere with myself less when I'm playing? Can I make my breathing more peaceful, more efficient? So those are kind of on the psychophysical level, having mastery. And then on a musical level, I might listen to some great violinists out there. So for example, somebody that inspires me is Augustin Hadlich. He's this wonderful, I'm sure the string players know all about him. He's one of my favorite violinists on the circuit right now. And he has a little masterclass series. It's 4-minute clips where he'll talk about certain issues. And so sometimes just going to different sources. So during this COVID time, I've been going to different sources like Augustine, like listening to some of his offerings online or listening to some of my favorite singers like Joyce DiDonato or Thomas Hampson. They just make me fall in love with music all over again. So that gets back to the intrinsic joy, that first motivator. So my friend Brenda Fedoric in Vancouver, flute player in Vancouver Opera, teaches at UBC, wonderful colleague. She would say it's our own responsibility to keep ourselves inspired. And I love that invitation. So we can, reach out for these sources of inspiration to help us at this time. And so bringing all that back to your Mozart concerto, for example, and bringing it to life, can I bring more joy? Can I bring more sparkle? Can I get a better sound here? And recording yourself as well, that gives you feedback. And, yeah.
Looking for new single elements in what we practice can be very inspiring. And now we have the time to do it. And also for students having trouble getting started, it's only May. Think about when you really have to be at your best. Is it going to be September? Will there be any, maybe master classes or lessons at MYO? It's going to be sooner. So imagine yourself playing in a master class in 2 or 3 weeks, and what you need to do in order to be able to learn as much as you can possibly learn from that master teacher in that time. That might help you get in the room.
Yeah.
And I encourage you all to share your ideas with each other. There might be something that one person is doing and they don't realize it might help someone else. So share it on Slack.
Carolyn, I love the ideas of the different types of motivation. Let's say fear is maybe one of the worst types of motivation. Intrinsic joy would be the best one. The task value is a very realistic one. That's a very tangible one. And then the rewards. I just wanted to give the students a sort of, from what a grown-up version of the rewards thing. I remember preparing for an audition, and I was doing my usual dissociative state, like the stressor was coming up and I was maybe not practicing in a very efficient way. And at the time I was practicing at the university, not in my apartment. And so I took myself aside and said, Lorna, the audition is going ahead, let's say on the 29th of June. It is going ahead whether you're ready or not. It would be better if you're ready. That would be a better scenario than if you weren't ready. So if you want to be ready, that means you have to get your butt to the practice room. That would be in your own best interests. However, I said, with a little inner dialogue, I said, Lorna, I know you find this quite a powerful stressor, and it is quite frightening. So let's acknowledge that. On the way to the practice room at the university, there's a really nice cafe. You are allowed to go there for half an hour on your way to the practice room, and you can get a nice latte and take your book and just enjoy yourself. But then, my goodness, you have to get your butt to the practice room. Yeah. And it was a way of, that's the reward motivator. Example.
Excellent. You drink a lot of coffee. I never could have drunk coffee before I performed. However, I was the opposite. I had to decompress and calm down as opposed to rev up. Anyway, this might lead into effective goal setting for practice, for performance. Perhaps we can get into that a little bit.
Definitely, because my next questions were, how would you coach a student who just doesn't put the time into well-concentrated practice, who kind of, like you don't get to play at Wimbledon just because you like tennis and you just like playing tennis, so it's the same for us. If you really want to get to the top level, you need to take apart your game, analyze it, so good practice. And then the other part of the question was when a student is unable to complete playing assignments on time, so this might all play into this next topic of
the effective goal setting, so you play your best when the big day comes.
That's right. Yeah.
This is all goal setting. And I want to mention something. When I did my MHK work to become a coach, all of my colleagues were athletes. So I learned so much about sport and athletics that really enriched my life. And I read several books on Michael Phelps, the great American swimmer who won more medals than some countries, this guy. I read a book by Bob Bowman, who was his swimming coach. And, Olympics are in a 4-year cycle. So 3 years before each Olympic Games, Bowman would give Phelps 1,000 days of goals. like goals for every single day leading up to the Olympics. Because Bowman, as a coach, knew that if Phelps was going to succeed in his goal of winning gold medals, etc., this was the work he had to do. So 1,000 days of goals, can you imagine? Goals for athletes can be a little different than us because they're very detail and fact-oriented, like time-oriented. We're not quite the same in music because it's so subjective. But we can borrow from this effective planning that Phelps used in our areas. I'm going to go over this quickly. I see we only have about 15, 20 minutes left. There are three main areas that I feel we must confront if we're going to effectively practice for a big performance. Number one is to look at the big picture. So what I have clients do is to print out blank calendar pages between today and the goal performance. So say you're going to do a recital next June or May or whatever. Print out blank calendar pages from now until then. If you're going to do a master class in 2 weeks, it's a little short term, but you could do the same, print out calendar pages until then. Write in your performance event to start with. This is the end goal. Write in your repertoire for that performance. Then looking back from the performance, write in when you want everything prepared. If this is for a recital, it would be probably with piano. And then before that, write in when you want everything ready to rehearse with piano. Before that, write in when you want to have everything ready to play for your teacher. So you're working back from the full performance event. Presumably you will want everything ready to go if time allows, a month before, 6 weeks before. It depends on the time available to you and the challenge. It might be different if you're memorizing something. It might be farther in advance from the performance event. So that's number one. You look at the big picture. Number two is now you have to figure out what you have to do every single day, every week in order to achieve these goals. Now, I want to back up a little bit about this goal setting. This goal setting is what they call SMART goal setting in athletics. I had never heard about this before when I started to study. All of my colleagues in my class had heard about it. It's very big in sport. It's really translatable to music. So by writing in goals, and this would mean even the goal of when you want everything ready with piano, when you want everything ready for your teacher. These are goals that if they follow a SMART goal format, you're much more likely to achieve them. Lofty goals are important, but if they're not achievable, they're not helpful in this context. So a SMART goal is specific, it's measurable. That means that you can tell at the performance date if you've reached your goal. It's attainable, and that's connected with the T. I'll get back to that. The R is either realistic or relevant. Both are very important. So if the goal is important to you, you're more likely to do the work in order to achieve it. It's got to be realistic or there's no point. If you think you want to memorize a concerto you've never learned before by tomorrow, it's not realistic. The T is connected with that. That's timely. So is your goal attainable in the time that you have in order to prepare? And that's the biggest one that gets my students. It's the time element.
Me too. Yeah.
With students, and I find, Lorna, I don't know if you found this, it's such an art to assigning repertoire that fits this format for every age of student. And I find even as I'm ending my career as a teacher, it's still a challenge to get that. You want to set performance goals that are high but attainable. So yeah. all of your goals for the big picture and now the daily, weekly practicing should follow a SMART goal format. So many of you do practice journals. I have clients do a grid with the days of the week and everything they're going to do every day. that they print out and fill in. If any of you want it, just let Chris know and I can send you these grids. You can try them out. So you have to figure out, perhaps with your teacher, perhaps yourself, how do I have to practice every day and what do I have to practice so that at the end of the week, at the end of the month, I've reached my goals so that by the time of the performance, I have the work done. Now, number 3, you've got your long-term, your daily, weekly goal setting, and now a very important element that many musicians leave out are these midterm goal concerts that we do. 90% of successful performers do these events publicly. I was in the 10% of successful performers who did them privately. So I would do my goal-setting concerts only for my teacher. Almost all of my students that I've had for the last 20 years do these events publicly. But I was successful, they're successful, we're different learners. So it depends on your personal learning style as to whether you want to do these publicly or not. Again, these will be SMART goal concerts, and they're going to start with a recording for your cell phone every single day. It can be 10 seconds, it can be a minute, it doesn't have to be a whole movement, it can be slower than usual, but it's a time where you push play on your video on your phone, you walk over to your music stand, you bow to the phone, and you start to get a feeling of performing. And then you perform that segment without stopping like you would in a concert. The point of this is to get us used to playing when we're uncomfortable. Now, you start with something that's reasonably low stress, which is playing for yourself for your cell phone, and then we want to amp up the stress. So you'll email somebody beforehand and say, I'm going to make a recording at exactly this time. I'm going to send you the link. So even that will amp up your stress a little bit. And this should be somebody non-judgmental, maybe a non-musician. Number 3, you're going to do it, because you can't do this live right now, do another cell phone video and send it to a musician who does not play your instrument. Then amp it up again the next week, perhaps. Send another video to someone who does play your instrument but is very friendly. And then at the end, send it to somebody who you feel is highly judgmental. And that'll really amp up the stress. I just don't suggest you ask for commentary unless you really want the commentary. I would send a video to Lorna and ask for commentary. There are other people, because I would want to receive her instruction. I would not send a video to somebody whose opinion I didn't value. And Lorna, the last time we were speaking, you mentioned the concertmaster of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Recall that? Can you recall that?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So this was something that showed up on Noah Kakiyama's Bulletproof Musician, which is a wonderful resource for all of us. Students and professionals alike. And it was an interview about memorization. For me, I find memorization a very powerful stressor. I can kind of deal fine with high stress orchestra concerts. I don't do that many concertos. I love playing, so there's intrinsic joy in it for me, but the fact of memorization itself is a big stressor. And it was fascinating. So recently I was preparing for a concerto, and so I tried to do what Carolyn is talking about, have a few, more than a few dry runs, at least a long way out. So for me, like the kind of minimum cutoff point would be that you are ready to go a month before. And actually I would revise that now. When memorizing concerto, it has to be maybe 2 months in advance for it to be absolutely secure. And I was very inspired and impressed that the concertmaster of Philadelphia Orchestra, when he has to play a concerto with his orchestra, so one of the great orchestras in the world, that's a big stimulus, that's a big stressor. He prepares 30 dry runs in public beforehand. And that just kind of brought it home to me. It's like you just need to know what you need to do to land the plane safely. and to just know yourself, know your own preparations, know what it will take to be able to land a plane without crashing.
Absolutely. And what he is doing in those little performances, I think we watched the same webinar with Noah, because I remember him saying that the concert master said he was getting used to playing when he wasn't comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a terrific statement, and it also expresses his personal performing style.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's one of the greats in the business.
Mm-hmm.
So, your students, some of you are young professionals, many of you are students, do not feel it's abnormal to want to get used to having that edge of performing. It's normal. That's what we do as performers. And perhaps I can segue a little bit into the question that we got at the very beginning, which was, what do I do to avoid being distracted in performance?
Mm-hmm.
I've mentioned, Diana. The main thing I could say, and this is a topic for a 2-hour talk, would be when you're performing, have a plan for what you're going to concentrate on if you get distracted. Have a plan to, like I mentioned, keyboard and bass, cello players, bassoonists often concentrate on driving the harmony. If you get distracted by anything, it's good to practice imagining yourself driving the harmony. And this is what you do in all those little performances. This is why you're practicing performing for your cell phone. It's to get used to not only to evaluate the technical expertise when you're performing, but also to get used to getting back on if you're distracted. I would concentrate. My go-to was the sound or the phrasing. I would plan my performing so that if I got distracted, I would get into the thing I loved the most about playing the flute, which was the sound that came through the phrasing. And I practiced this. I practiced this in my practice room. I practiced it in rehearsals. I practiced getting into that concept so I was ready in a performance. So if I had negative thoughts of any sort, I would channel those thoughts into the phrasing or the harmony or the rhythm. Many percussionists think about driving the excellence of the rhythm. Some people will focus on the character. I guess that's the same as the phrasing. Mm-hmm. The idea is to practice it in these mini performances so it's ready when you're on stage.
Carolyn,
yes.
Could I add something with that? Because I think sometimes for performers, we have a fear of making a mistake, and sometimes if we make a mistake, we can get very distracted by that, and that can lead to a whole flood of negative self-talk candidates. So having thought of that in advance is very helpful, and having strategies in your toolbox to deal with that.
Strategies that you've practiced. Exactly. And
so I would say that the goal is not to go for perfection but to go for expression.
Yes.
In an addition, and that ties in with what you're saying about having a clear idea of the phrasing of the sound, or Jeannie Baxter would talk about having a very clear sense of the character, even having cue words on your excerpts to help you. The brain can only think about one or two things at once. So if you give it something to do, something constructive to do, that will. There's not so much room for the negative self-talk. And also, if you've done the really careful preparation, where you've built your confidence, you've done all the test runs, and you've not only have you done them, but you've learned from them. Like, what is the feedback? So you're going to fail. In these test runs, there's going to be ones that you're not happy with. And that's just feedback. So if you can keep a steady mind, it's just helpful information. It just shows you where you need to shore up your practice a little bit. And then you do the work, and then you do another one. And so in a way, you fail better, you fail better, you fail better until, so we use these dry runs to in a very intelligent way. So then you can have more confidence on stage that your mind is not going down that rabbit hole of what if I make a mistake here, because that will have happened probably in a dry run, but then you have taken measures, and then you can trust the work that you've done and trust the practice.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because our minds, especially when we get more used to performing, our minds can wander a little bit on occasion. And that's the time when I would focus my attention on the beautiful sounds coming from my colleagues. I would do that consciously. Mm-hmm. If I was starting to think about, oh no, the big second flute solo in the New World is coming up, what am I going to do? Where am I going to hide? I would listen to the strings, listen to those beautiful first violin players playing to present my little solo. And that would take my mind off my worry, which is the negative self-talk, and into the actual performance. Another thing you mentioned, if I can just say it quickly, Lorna, which was so great, was distractions that happen to us. One of the biggest ones is making an error, or having a colleague make an error. And that's when you've done the practicing in your practice room and you focus on that element in the music. Mm-hmm. So anticipating the types of distractions that might happen can be helpful. And they're different for different situations.
You know, Carolyn, I love horses. And sometimes I think about this kind of training. It's like training a police horse, you know, that you know, police horses have to walk into riots and be unflappable. Yeah. So be sensitized to loud noises or people acting strangely, you know, fire. So in a way, we're training our inner police horse to be steady as a rock.
Well, speaking of walking into fire, I remember one specific performance we did, I won't say with which conductor, when he got so enthusiastic. Two was down there and one was up there. And looking at this thing that was absolutely opposite to what we were all hearing made us all look down and concentrate. Mm-hmm. Because we were definitely walking into a burning building there. And that was totally unexpected. So what we did was to trust our training, change where we looked, which is our gaze, where we were looking, look down and just listen and react. Mm-hmm. You get a lot of burning buildings on stage on occasion. And something, Lorna, you also mentioned before is has to do with excellence versus perfection. Mm-hmm. We're looking for perfection in the practice room. That's what we do. We are not looking for perfection on stage. We're looking for excellence. There's a huge difference.
I love that. So there's no room for mediocrity in the practice room. Like everything we do should be with excellence and with high intention.
Yes.
I just want to read a lovely comment from Hannah that's shown up. I like to think when I make a mistake, people know now that I'm not perfect, so I give myself permission to just play. That's beautiful. That's exactly right. And if you're playing with a generous spirit and expressively, people will of course you try not to make mistakes, but people will forgive you. If you're playing in a defensive manner in order not to go wrong, the audience doesn't receive very much. And then if you do go wrong, they notice it so much more. So always play generously and not defensively.
Absolutely. And that's where we find the true joy in our performances, I think, and when we can really soar. It's when we've done our preparation to the best of our ability, and sometimes you can't prepare as much as you want, but we've done it to the best of our ability, and we're just letting it out.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe another thing that feeds into this, I know we're almost out of time here. We kind of are out of time, but how would you coach a student who plays well in rehearsal but not in masterclass or recital? Or how would you coach students who are comparing themselves to others? This is difficult for all students, you know, and even for professionals. When you walk into a professional audition, behind closed doors, everybody in the warm-up room always sounds so impressive that you can really feel frightened. So we all run into these kind of issues, not just students, but professionals too. And how would you advise somebody to regain their focus in a situation like that?
Very good question. And part of it is situational, to anticipate the distraction you're going to get in the specific time. For example, in a warm-up room with 100 people playing your piece, all playing it faster and better than you, right? So you have, we call those people peacocks, by the way. They're all much faster, Carnival the animal, you know, like, anyway. So part of it is you anticipate those people are going to be there. Mm-hmm. And one of my colleagues, Gretchen Langevin, actually, used to say, her phrase was, don't wear it out. So a peacock playing something really, really fast or whatever in a warm-up room for an audition, you expect it and you think, don't wear it out. Or as Lorna would say, you sound better through the door, which is actually true. I'm talking in a circle here.
It's just something that occurred to me. Is something I read. What is it? Clara Hughes, the Canadian Olympian. She competed in the Winter Olympics in speed skating, Summer Olympics in cycling. Yeah. And it was a very helpful thing. And it was advice she got from some First Nations elders. They just said, Clara, you cannot be free to do your best unless you wish the same for everybody else.
That's beautiful.
And I thought that was amazing. So when you feel that initial shock of fear, oh, that person sounds so much better than me, just take a breath. Just take a breath. Wish them well. I wish them well, and then you're free to move on and do your best.
Absolutely. And I know cheesy is one of my favorite adjectives. It's cheesy to say, but we all have our own unique way to play. Exactly. And when in a judged situation like a jury, you cannot control the personal tastes of the jury. They might prefer your way, they might prefer someone else. It's very subjective. So your self-talk that you have ready for that warm-up room might be, I have my own voice. Here I go. She has her own voice. He has his own voice. I have mine. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to share this music.
And it might be helpful for the participants to know that, certainly in my experience on professional orchestral juries, there's almost never a consensus. Almost never. It's quite rare, and it's quite beautiful when that happens. But so you can take courage from that. You know, that speaks to what you're saying, doesn't it? You know, it's. And you can't possibly please everybody. We have a good question here. Okay. Sometimes if the preparation time is too long, so how do we not become dry and stale, basically?
I think this could be well answered by what Lorna mentioned about doing a piece that we do very often for flute, which is Mozart Concerto, looking for specific things that you can add to the piece. If the preparation time is too long, I don't think a preparation time could ever actually be too long. But giving a piece a little rest and coming back in a refreshed way, listening to different versions, maybe that would be helpful to find more inspiration for the piece.
Could I offer something, Carolyn? So I'm thinking about the Mozart example. What I find helpful is to play other pieces by Mozart.
Oh, great idea.
So that I'm kind of steeped in that, or Beethoven. You know, we have a lot of beautiful Beethoven excerpts on the flute. You know, maybe pick up a Beethoven violin sonata and, try that, or play the Mozart flute quartets, or try a violin concerto. Just steeping yourself in that musical world and that language, I think helps to refresh you.
I think that's a great idea.
But it still plays into the general improvement. Yeah.
Another tip for practicing is to think about one specific thing you would like to accomplish with this music that you've already learned quite well. Focus just on the sound, focus just on the phrasing, just on the intonation, whatever, but one thing at a time sometimes can be helpful.
And even memorizing it, if it's something that you know inside out, just sometimes memorizing it can give you an even deeper connection to it.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, do you feel like you have got through all the main points that you wanted to make? And is it okay to go to questions now? Or do you have some more things that you would like to say? Because there are some questions showing up.
Why don't we go to the questions because there's just too much to teach. I didn't even talk about effective practicing mindset, but it would take too much time. So question.
Okay. So Charlie has a good question here. Oh, that's a very honest question. Yeah. Welcome to the real world. Yeah.
Well, incredible colleagues around you. That's exactly how I felt when I joined the Montreal Symphony, because I was 23 and everybody in the woodwind section, they were my professors. So one thing that was great from the get-go was I knew if anything was out of tune, it was me. I just fixed that. And the second part of your question is, and also for that is the third confidence builder, which is trying to draw on the energy of those around you who are excelling and using that in a positive as opposed to negative way. The second part, as well as knowing the panel is listening to you, that is not helpful to be thinking. So you want to get again the performance mindset from when you're performing or rehearsing with a new orchestra. Get your mind back on something in the music that you can control, because nothing is going to be able to control. You cannot control the minds of your colleagues. You can control your preparation, your mindset, and the way you're playing, but not what they're thinking about you. And as Lorna said, it's rare to get consensus on a panel. Mm-hmm. So you're going for your personal best. You're going to fit in, to serve the music, not to please. Mm-hmm. Do you have comments on that, Lorna?
That's so helpful, and not to please, to do one's best. But I mean, I think to be honest and to be humble and to just have courage. Just to choose courage. I mean, to have a willingness to learn as well. I mean, I feel like we can be learning our whole lives. I mean, I feel like I'm learning from my colleagues in the symphony all the time, or learning from our soloists that we have. There might be, our principal hornbill Caballero might, he can play the theme to Princess Leia on a run-out concert in the middle of nowhere, and I'll get goosebumps because it's so incredibly beautiful. So you just learn. I think to just adopt this open-hearted attitude of just learning your whole life long, and perhaps on a more practical, just down-to-earth level, it's okay also to ask questions. I mean, your colleagues sometimes will really appreciate if you're interested, and you might say, "How do you do?" Or could you, or somebody you trust, perhaps. How would you? Can I improve this? Or it's okay. I mean, you have to be careful with that. Just to make sure, people that you would trust. You have to learn to be the good judge of that, and you also keep your own sovereignty, and that's really important. So that being willing to learn, being willing to be flexible, being willing to improve. I remember when I was going through my whole tenure process at Pittsburgh, you feel like every note you're playing is being judged. And then the conductor, their principal conductor, will also be kind of picking on you. He's not a mean guy, but that they sort of have to do that, especially in a principal role. They want you to jump through this hoop, jump through that hoop, so that they know if they can trust you and if they can feel confident. That you have to help them to feel confident in you, that you can do whatever they want. But at the time, it can feel like you're being picked on.
Can I jump in, because I'm going to forget?
Yeah.
Something. Lorna's comments about doing what a conductor asks. This is not what I meant by pleasing someone, because we do want to please the conductor. That's our job. We want to do what is asked of us. So that's different than what I was saying about pleasing everybody around you.
Yes.
A conductor, whether they're pleasant or very unpleasant, they have instruction. It's our job to fulfill the instruction. So I just want to clarify that.
I think that's a very good clarification. And even if you would choose not to play it like that, it's a mark of your own musicianship if you can do what they want and make it sound authentic and compelling and believable. And so that's our job, as you say.
Absolutely.
So my little mantra for myself during the whole tenure process was do not contract, because there's a lot of things that will make you want to contract. That your shoulders will get tight, or you'll be trying really, really hard. as Carolyn was saying, you cannot control the outcome. So if you stay spacious, stay open, just keep fill your space in the world. You're entitled to do that, you know. So that's my advice there. Yeah.
Any more questions?
There's no more questions that I can see in the live comments.
I do encourage you to email me if you have personally, if you have any. Often a thought will come up the minute the live chat is closed, right? If you have any questions, just email me. Chris will give you my email address. I'll do my best to answer every email.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I just love this, and you're so generous to share your expertise with all of us, and just to all the participants out there, all the musicians out there, stay safe, and I hope this is helpful to you, and you can develop your own inner strength going forward.
And I want to thank you too, Lorna. You're a wonderful colleague, and to be so open and receptive to this work, I think is absolutely terrific. So I thank you too. And Chris, thank you for setting this up.
Of course. Thank you both so much for joining us today. It really means a lot for you both to be so open and to know we all share many of these same experiences. So thank you both so much for being here today.
Pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.